On February 25th, 2022, From Software released their long-awaited game, Elden Ring. Elden Ring was a game on a scale that we had never seen from From, taking the skeleton of the wildly successful Dark Souls games and placing it into one of the largest and densest open world that gaming had seen for years. With 6, I think, legacy dungeons, dozens of smaller dungeons, 100 plus bosses, countless areas to explore, players could spend dozens and dozens of hours in the game only to just scratch the surface. Just beating all of the main bosses and getting all the remembrances, which is comparable to just kind of running through Dark Souls, which you can do in around 20 to 30 hours, will take you close to 70 or 80 in Elden Ring. Suffice it to say, people were expected and prepared to spend an incredible amount of time exploring all that the lands between had to offer. And yet, despite the wealth of content offered, on March 17th, less than 3 weeks after release, someone beat the game in less than 40 minutes. Now, who could have done such a thing? Speedrunners, obviously. It's kind of their whole thing, right? It's in the name.
I was thinking about why so many in the radical left participate in speedrunning. Huh?
In fact, anyone familiar with soul speedrunning, the biggest question is probably, why did it take that long in the first place? I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that run because it would be getting away from my main focus here, but I will link it in the description if you're curious to see what the first official posted Elden Ring speedrun looks like. What I will say about that run is that it was done by a Korean player named Ingne135 with an in-game time of 34 minutes and 39 seconds, which is a commendable time. And also, that it held the record for less than 24 hours. I think anyone that has casually turned into a Games Done Quick event at one point could probably tell you that the Souls games have a very dedicated speedrunning community. They are exceptionally talented at breaking down the games to the base aspects and exploiting them to do unbelievable things. And like a lot of speedruns, what's on display is not just the skill of the player, their complete knowledge and practice of whatever bosses they actually fight instead of running around, but the technical prowess of the community as a whole. Small glitches that let you clip just far enough out of bounds to open a door from the wrong side and skip a whole area, or in Sekiro's case, maybe trivializing some of the hardest bosses in the game. Good stuff either way. In any case, what I want to focus on today is what happens when speedrunners go too far in the pursuit of perfection. Now, for a frame of reference here, let's start off by talking about what I consider kind of the golden example of like a perfect speedrun, right? Bloodborne. Just like any game, it has a whole variety of different speedrun categories, but for our purposes today, we're going to take a look at the current patch any percent unrestricted world record currently held by Genso. Now let's take a look at how this run opens. As we can expect from the world record holder, the run is basically perfect, right? The run starts, Genso makes a beeline for exactly where he needs to be, perfectly evades the wolf, then perfectly uses the door to avoid getting eaten by said wolf, perfectly spanks aforementioned wolf to get it out of the way, and then continues to perfectly kite it exactly where he needs it to be so that it attacks him in just the perfect spot so he can pop out on the other side of this gate and pull the lever. All of that perfection in just over 70 seconds. In this first minute alone, we've already seen incredibly tight stamina routing, enemy kiting, iframe abuse, as well as an out-of-bounds glitch, a sequence break, and a save and quit skip. In 73 seconds, we've already been introduced to almost all of the major glitches and strategies the run will use at a simple level that allows anyone watching to understand exactly what is going on while granting an appreciation for how precise the runner is required to be. After a quick trip to the Hunter's Dream, what follows is a road trip through the Forbidden Woods while Genso grabs some very specific item drops. After a few minutes of running, which mind you requires incredible routing and stamina timing, he clips out of bounds, falls into a boss arena, saves and quits, which messes with the boss AI, and then beats them to death while they just kinda stand there and take it. That whole sequence is a really good preview of how the rest of the run is gonna go, as it's all pretty formulaic from there, right? Genso continues to run really fast, pick up the specific items he needs, pop back to the Hunter's Dream, level up, etc, maybe do a couple glitches to jump down, do some parkour, and even have a couple fights that you can't skip and just need really tight strategies for. Approximately 15 more minutes of that, and ta-da, your blood has been born. Now, why did I bring all this up, right? I brought it up because I think this is a really good example of what I consider to be almost the perfect recipe for a popular speedrun. Bloodborne, despite what Sony seems to think, is an incredibly popular game, so you have a lot of audience interest baked in right off the bat. Check. The run is very short, clocking in at just over 21.5 minutes, which makes sense since Bloodborne is relatively short. So it's fast-paced, very engaging, and watchable to the casual audience. Check. It displays a blend of not only technical prowess with glitches and routing, but also tremendous skill, as several bosses, like I mentioned, can't be glitched and must instead be fought, albeit with specific strategies. Check. What all of that combines to make is an incredibly engaging speedrun for anyone watching, regardless of their own personal experience with both speedrunning and Bloodborne. Beyond that, another key factor here is that everything that happens on screen is very digestible and understandable, even to the untrained eye. You don't need to know the ins and outs of Bloodborne or Souls games or the engine or anything to watch and understand, oh, he did a glitch and he wasn't supposed to go there and that messed with the boss, so now it won't hit back. It's easy. All of those factors are the keys to an engaging speedrun, both for the audience and the runners themselves, because lest we forget, if the run isn't fun or engaging to do, why would anyone want to do it? Elden Ring had many of these qualities at the start of the game's life. It sold gangbusters, an unprecedented level of success for what was already one of the biggest modern gaming companies. Check. Despite the game being massive, the open nature of the world lended itself well to a very short runtime, making it approachable from the audience and new runner perspective. Check. Several bosses had to be fought without cheeses, although, they had the broken weapon and the frost and whatever. It maybe trivialized the fights, but nevertheless it was a dangerous strategy that still required a lot of skill and planning, which can be seen in the fact that in the original run, Ingne actually dies several times. But, it was the first run, so still world record, I guess. Check. Most of what occurs in this run, insofar as glitches and strategies and all that, is very similar to the Bloodborne run, so it has that same aspect of being very understandable and digestible, even to the untrained eye. Check. But Elden Ring's path differed from the predecessors greatly, all thanks to a new strategy introduced on March 22nd with the introduction of... In Elden Ring, the zip is a glitch that causes the player to shoot forward at a breakneck speed, sending them across great distances basically instantly. It is also a byproduct of how the game kind of functions, and so it can be done at any time or place and doesn't require a specific area or enemy or setup or anything, unlike the sort of parry out of bounds stuff from the first two Dark Souls games, making it incredibly versatile. If you're curious to know more about how the zips actually work, Daravae, one of the Elden Ring community speedrun mods, actually made a really good video that I'll link below. At first, it was kind of just an easy way to skip across some big gaps or areas, skip out on running that way on foot. In the first run posted on the speedrun.com boards by Hazeblade, it's used once just to skip the foreskin duo in Farum Azula and go right to the Malekith fight. And that first run, posted on March 22nd, clocked in at 24 minutes 37 seconds. Overall, it really wasn't that much different than where the normal run was at the time. In fact, it only shaved off 10 minutes from the first ever speedrun, which is a big jump, but nothing astounding for what would prove to be such a capable glitch. And that was just the start, as it didn't take long for a lot more eyes to get drawn to the glitch, and very, very quickly, runners found a lot more places to use the zip and more ways of exploiting it to go further and faster than before. Just 3 days after Hazeblade's original zip run, the record was beaten by a full minute, which is a lot in speedrun time, right? 10 days after that, the record was smashed by a whole 4 minutes and 2 seconds. The zip may not have been entirely understood, and it was hard to use and hard to plot, but like anything, people studied it more and more until it just became a finely honed precision tool, used to just shear right through the lands between. What started as aiming off into the distance just to fly out as far as possible to skip some running quickly became looking at this specific rock to fly at this specific angle into just the right spot to land right at the site of grace and meet Melina in 2 minutes. You get the idea. As the days went on, the game got more and more optimized. The zip allowed for more and more of the game to just be completely skipped. By the start of April, you could skip all of Ashen Lane Dell and walk right into the Radagon fight. bit by bit, whole chunks of the game were just disappearing right before our eyes. Within a month of the first zip run being posted, the zip run record went from 24 minutes 37 seconds to just 5 minutes and 58 seconds. At that point, gone were any actual fights, and the closest thing there was to other speedrun tech outside of zipping was just a handful of air attacks so you didn't take fall damage. They cut away so many pieces of the cake that all that was left was just the bare essentials, like the frosting stuck to the tin. There's just nothing there anymore. So as you'd expect, the category stagnated a bit after that, but sub 5 minutes was achieved on July 18th. Two runners, Hypersomniac and SeekerTV, went back and forth for a few weeks, whittling down through the fours until Seeker got a 3 minutes 58 on July 30th, followed by Hyper achieving a time of 3 minutes and 56 seconds. The run in which he did was posted to speedrun.com on August 15th, 2022 with the description, quote, "Had to piss really bad at the start, so I had to go fast," end quote, where it sits with the world record to this day. Now, eagle-eared viewers may have noticed that I mentioned just a few seconds ago that the category stagnated, right? So as you'd expect, the category stagnated a bit after that. Thank you, 30 seconds in the past me. Now, that's not to say that the game stagnated though. Far from it, in fact. The game continued to be routed, optimized, and competed over for most of the rest of the year, just with the big asterisk and caveat of no zips allowed. What had happened was the community quickly realized that zipping needed to be basically quarantined lest it infect the rest of the game's runs and categories, so a specific zip category was created and used for the runs I mentioned earlier. The normal speedrun fare was put into either unrestricted or restricted categories depending on which glitches were allowed, and both of those flourished for some time. See, as the zip went on and it cut more and more content from the game, it lost those golden check marks I brought up earlier. The time may have gone down further and further and further, but in doing so, runners committed the greatest sin they can against a run. They made it boring. Boring to run, boring to route, boring to watch. It killed interest in the run basically immediately. There's a reason why at GDQ this year it was any percent glitchless shown off and not any percent zip. One of those is an hour-plus run featuring great opportunities for a community to show a beloved game from a unique perspective, have a good time, raise some donation money, and even beat the game in the amount of time it takes most people to get to Stormvale Castle. The other is a run where you spend 4 minutes looking at an empty screen confused until Horalu kills you and somehow that beats the game. What the fuck? Huh? I still don't get this one. Somebody explain this shit. Anyway. There's just no engagement from the audience side. There's barely any from the runner's side. It's boring to watch, it's boring to route, it's boring to play, and the community just wasn't interested in it. There's just no technical skill on display here to get invested in from the runner or audience side. And that's not to say that this type of run is always a bad thing. There are a lot of games that have runs like this where they trivialize huge swaths of content and shave a 50-hour game down to like 8 minutes because they just corrupt the game. Those can be super cool to watch. One of my favorite speedruns ever is the Castlevania Symphony of the Night speedrun, where you get like the really specific items, you corrupt your save file so it turns your inventory into like a coder, and then you like put the specific items in the specific spots, and for some reason that makes the game play the end cutscene. Like, that's awesome. It's such a cool way to show just an unparalleled level of prowess of the game without just being boring and doing the same thing over and over. Another recent example of this phenomena is actually Baldur's Gate 3, where that one actually probably had an even worse case of this. It didn't take long for runners to figure out how to beat the game incredibly quickly using a lot of glitches, so as a result it didn't take long for the run to get optimized down to just mere minutes, at which point people weren't really that interested in shaving off those few remaining seconds as much. This caused the community to get more creative with their categories, but that's a story for another time. Now, I think that these types of runs are an inevitability. They're always going to pop up, especially in big games like Elden Ring. Any game that size is going to have something like this to slip through the cracks until it's out in the hands of millions of players breaking the game all over. It's just a matter of fact, right? They always pop up, but they don't last all that long, because in a kind of funny way, when we look to answer the question of, well, how fast can I beat this game? Sometimes the answer we find and the method we use is really boring to look at, and really isn't what we want when we think of speedrunning.
The reason is the left's lack of work ethic. What? Go fast rather than do it right. And in a Petersonian sense...
Petersonian?
I think a lot of people kind of knew what direction zip runs were headed almost immediately. I mean, Hazeblade, the guy who posted the original zip run on speedrunning.com, said this about zipping and the glitch and what it would do for the speedrun in the middle of the first run.
I think for it to become like mainline any percent, I think it's going to do a lot of damage to this category. There's just too much that can go wrong and just completely screw people over that are like putting hours and hours and hours into playing the game well, and then it comes down to you getting to the parts where you need to zip, not getting it in the first or second try, and then, well, thanks for playing. Better luck next time, bud. And you have to do that 10 times in a run. Because instead of people like taking the time to optimize the run for doing all of the zips, it's literally going to be somebody's just going to do the minimum amount of zips required to get world record. And then somebody that doesn't feel like playing at a higher level will just take a gamble on another zip to try to save like 30 seconds or something instead of like learning how to do a boss fight better. And I just think that that's just not really in the nature of speedrunning. Like I just don't think that that's not what I think about when I think of speedrunning. I think about like people just being really good at the game. And I think this is just it kind of just comes off as an excuse to not grind the game to its max potential. That's just kind of what it is. And that's not like a disrespect.
This sort of stuff always makes me think of this quote from an article written by Soren Johnson, the lead developer of Civ 4, where he was talking about players optimizing their strategies in games. And he said, quote, "Many players cannot help approaching a game as an optimization puzzle. What gives the greatest reward for the least risk? What strategy provides the highest chance, or even a guaranteed chance, of success? Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game." And he's exactly right. Zipping focused so much on the optimization factor that it forgot about the fun factor. If it was more engaging and interesting from the runner perspective, the record would have changed by now. Could the run be cut even shorter? Could it go down to 3 minutes 55 seconds? 50 seconds? Probably. But I don't really care to find out, and seemingly no one else does. Because what's the point? Maybe there is an even more optimal little zip you can do. Maybe there's a zip you can do right at the start of the game to send you to the Elden Beast Arena, kill it for you, and beat the game in 12 seconds. Who knows? But the substance of whatever that theoretical maximum would be is no different than what the run currently is, so it's really no more interesting to see aside from maybe a passing curiosity. You can watch the world record run yourself. It's not like Hyper Insomniac is getting all the zips first try. You could probably shave 5, maybe even 10 seconds off the route as it is currently just from optimizing all of that, but no one cares to try, it seems, because it's such a pain to do and it's just boring to watch and boring to play. Just listen to the reaction he has immediately after he gets the world record for the category. That has lasted for 2 years at this point, I would like to add.
Oh, finally, I can focus on DS3. Fuck this game. Now, hopefully I'm done. We'll see.
At the end of that article I mentioned a little bit ago, Johnson shares an anecdote about how in Civ 2, combat encounters had some element of RNG, so players made a habit of kind of reloading saves from before the fights, basically until they won, until they got the favorable outcome, right? And so when they were working on Civ 3, they removed this RNG factor for battles because they didn't want people to get stuck just re-rolling and holding up the game, right? Which is a fair optimization. And people got mad. They were mad that their old trick didn't work anymore, that their optimal strategy got ruined. So the solution was to have battle RNG be an option in the settings, giving the players the choice to decide if they wanted to be able to do that or not. And to a certain level, this is the same strategy the community took with the runs. They didn't ban it outright, but they also didn't let it in the normal categories because it would just trivialize them. They recognized that the run would burn itself out quickly and didn't want to let it take the rest of the game and community down with it, but they didn't want to just kill it, so the option was still there. After all, at the start, there were obviously people interested in it. It had a few regular runners trying to shave that time down, as we talked about. As Johnson said, ultimately, the designer can't go wrong putting the player in control of their own experience. And that's exactly what the community has done. For the last 2.5 years, the people that love this game have continued to find new and fun ways to run it with stuff like mods, challenges, and races. Hell, just as I was about to finish this video, a special GDQ event featured a run by DrDootPhD where he played the game hitless on an electronic saxophone. The Zips answered the questions about what the fastest run looks like, so the community had to start looking in other directions, like what does the most fun run look like, what does the hardest run look like, etc, etc. And that is the core of speedrunning that the Zip runs neglected. It's just a really interesting case about what can get lost along the way in the pursuit of perfection. I've never really seen anything like this, so I wanted to talk about it. I hope you enjoyed this little run through. Thanks for watching.
Shadow, what the fuck are you talking about? You're a beta male, Sonic.